Okay, we're gonna have a chat today about some of the mistakes I've made on the trail. There's some areas here that you can learn if you either been just started backpacking or you've been backpacking for a few years. A lot of these mistakes are kind of like those things you think about when you're a kid and you just, why did I say that? That's not cringe about it years later. That's how I kind of feel about these mistakes. Some of them happened on my first backpacking trip years ago, but another ones of them happened actually just a few months ago. So I think there's something here for everyone to learn, or just a simple fresher and a good reminder for them. I think a good way to break down this video is I'm gonna give you guys a bunch of stories throughout, throw some B-roll over it to show you of my mistakes. Up first is hydration. A couple years ago, I was going on a backpacking trip with my girlfriend, and we had to fill up with waters down this meadow area, and we had roughly 4 liters of water with us each. But the problem is, we thought there was gonna be some water up at the top in the alpine area, but in the alpine area, it can get really dry, and we weren't expecting that. So we ended up climbing up to the alpine, sleeping there overnight, and we never found any water. We went up to the summit, came back down, and we were getting pretty thirsty by then, getting lightheaded, blacking out, getting head rushes every time we're standing up, and that was not a good time. Hydration can be something that's really dangerous, and you could get yourself in trouble. People die from it all the time. It's something you need to pay attention to. Another area of hydration that can be difficult for me is dealing with my salt content. When I was in Yosemite a couple years ago, I was sweating a ton. I was drinking lots of water and keeping myself well hydrated, but I didn't have any salt coming in. So after a couple hours while on trail, and I started getting these massive muscle cramps, and it almost ruined the hike for me. You can see for some of this B-roll, just, it's cringy watching my quads seize up like that. That was a less than ideal time. Yeah. It hurts just thinking about it. It's happened to me a couple of times while on trail when I haven't had a high enough salt intake, so that's why I got some electrolytes in here. This is actually just Gatorade. It was just nice and pretty for the thumbnails. So speaking of that Yosemite trip, I'm gonna bring us to our next talking point, and that's testing out your gear and testing it regularly. I didn't test out my sleeping pad before I was on trail in Yosemite. I'd been on a road trip for about a month, and my sleeping pad in that time had gotten a couple punctures in it. So that left for a pretty cold night while I was on trail. Woke up in the middle of the night with my sleeping pad flat, and it had 2 holes poked in it. No clue how those got there, but yeah, I didn't test out any of my gear before getting on the trail then. That Yosemite trip was a pretty rough one, but it was beautiful. Recommend it for anyone who's in the area. Another instance I had with not testing my gear was actually my first overnight trip with the X-Mid. I'd purchased my X-Mid about 6 weeks previous to this backpacking trip, and I set it up, followed Dan's awesome video online, just how to do it. It was super easy to do, so I didn't think twice of it. Problem was, 6 weeks later, I'd traveled to New Zealand, bought a van, and done all this other stuff. Life was crazy. But by the time I actually got around to setting it up, I had completely forgotten how to do it. That left for Paige being very upset and having a pretty miserable sleep because it was pretty stormy out in New Zealand. The tent was flopping around her, I was smacking in the middle of the night. I couldn't remember how to get tension proper in the tent. Luckily, we had service later on, and we were able to look it up on how we're supposed to set up the tent. On the top of a tent, it brings me to my next mistake I've made. And that's not packing a shelter with me whenever I'm on a rough trail. Last year, I was on a backpacking trip, and I was planning on cowboy camping. It's supposed to be beautiful conditions, no mosquitoes, and I thought everything was going to be fine. Well, just because there's no mosquitoes doesn't mean there's going to be other insects. Moths were attacking me all night. I hate it. I'd be just sleeping there, minding my own business, trying to get some Z's in, then attacked by these vicious creatures. It happened all night to me, so I wasn't really expecting that. There was another instance I had where I was on a really rough, hardly marked out trail, and it was borderline bushwhacky. It took me a few more hours than I was expecting to. I was expecting to just do the trail as a single day hike, not realizing in hindsight that it was probably should have been designed as an overnight backpacking trip, not just a day hike. I never brought a shelter with me, so that left me coming down in the dark in the bushwhacky, unmarked trail. That was not a great situation to be in. Very lucky nothing happened in that situation, considering I couldn't see 2 feet in front of me, even with my headlamp on. And that's another mistake I've made, is not researching the conditions well enough and underestimating them. On one backpacking trip I did, I was trying to do a spring hike up on the mountains here in Vancouver Island, and the snow conditions can be a lot more different than you expected. Just because there's not an avalanche risk in the spring, minus the cornices and whatnot, doesn't mean the snow conditions are going to give you a hard time. After trying to make my way up the logging road towards the trailhead, I'd spent 8 hours post-holing up to my waist, and I had finally called it quits. I was not able to get up there. If I had packed snowshoes, I would have been fine. Other instances I've had, while not estimating the conditions properly is not fully researching the trails and how long they actually are. I personally use all trails for a lot of my all my navigation, and the stated distances on all trails quite often is wrong. So yeah, sometimes it's good to just double check on from different apps to see where or how long your trail is going to be, and just like so you fully understand what you're getting yourself into. Weather can be a pretty challenging thing to predict. On my first ever backpacking trip, we went hiking in a windstorm and we ended up having a tree fall on us in the middle of the night. There was a million things that we did wrong and didn't know about at the time. There's a lot of things to be paying attention to while you're going out on your... Sorry guys, my battery dies. Show must go on, so I'm gonna use my iPhone for the rest of the video. Ugh, I'm such a nincompoop. Weather can be a difficult one to predict. Find something for your local area that works well. I use Spot WX. I'll link it down in the description. I use that to find what the weather forecast will be. It links a bunch of different resources together. It's really good. Problem is, it's not always right. And that ties into my last mistake that happened a few months ago while in New Zealand. And that's not building up enough of a buffer into your sleep system. The forecast was supposed to be nice and warm out. It was in the middle of February. So in the southern hemisphere, that's equivalent to middle of August in the northern hemisphere. So it's a nice hot time of the year. I was expecting it to be warm out, but during that specific hike, it was quite cold during the night. We woke up with sub-zero temperatures and I wasn't expecting that. Now I was able to sleep off and on throughout the night, but every time I woke up to shift around, I was quite chilled. If I had packed a few hundred grams more and packed another layer with me, that could have been enough to keep me warm. Pack that because I like to do what all of us like to do and be an ultralight gram weenie. It happens. For the most part, I've been fairly okay with packing enough into my sleep system, but that one time, it could have been a repeat of my Yosemite trip and left me cold and uncomfortable all night. If you guys enjoyed this video, check out on the sides over here or here. 5 areas of gear that I think that most people get wrong, but you probably don't because you're in the know-how, and this is a pretty neat channel. You're probably pretty far down the rabbit hole already of backpacking if you're watching this video.